I am Trey McLean, an environmental health specialist. As my boss, I wanted to fill you in on the complaints we've been receiving here at Arkansas Department of Environmental Quality from residents of Mayflower that have been experiencing health effects they believe to be caused from the Exxon oil spill back in 2013. I believe we need to do further research as to why these individuals are experiencing such outcomes and see if it has any correlation with the oil spill, and if it does, talk about things we should do to help these individuals get the care they need. I will give you a brief background to spark your memory of this event. It was March 29, 2013 at approximately 2:45 in the afternoon that an Exxon Pegasus pipeline, which was built in the 1940s, burst and spilled out nearly 3,000 barrels of bitumen crude oil through one of the only subdivisions called Northwood Subdivision in Mayflower. Mayflower has a population of nearly 2,234 residents. People who witnessed this said that the oil span was nearly 8 feet wide and 6 inches deep, running down the middle of the street. Within half an hour, ExxonMobil had representatives on the scene, and this turned into months of cleanup with nearly 600 different workers taking over the city. These included doctors, the Environmental Protection Agency, ADEQ, Exxon representatives, and Arkansas Game and Fish Commission. There were nearly 22 homes and residents that were told to evacuate, and this was only the people that oil really affected by oil being either in their yards or in their house. Everyone else was allowed to remain in their home who lived in the subdivision. Statistics say that pipeline spills occur every 3 days here in the U.S., but it is very rare that they ever occur in small towns like Mayflower or with this amount. This is an aerial view of the Northwood subdivision in Mayflower. It gives you a good sense of where the oil started, how it went down the street, and the homes that it affected. The other map is from us here at ADEQ of the site that we collected water samples, and all samples were negative for bitumen crude oil. This is another image. This is what the residents could see the moments after the burst occurred, and the flow of this went down the middle of the subdivision for nearly a day. So, in a way, Exxon was very generous in their efforts to keep people happy, especially the small town of Mayflower. They wrote checks for those badly affected for things like living expenses, putting families up in hotels, providing them meals, gas, and they even wrote checks for leisure pleasure activities like birthday parties. A couple days after the spill, 8 elementary school students were sent home from complaining of headaches and vomiting. The EPA had a doctor on site to look over the children, and he contributed their symptoms to poor air quality because the school was in very close proximity to where this incident occurred. We here at ADEQ ran air tests and concluded that there was no significant components in the air to cause any harm. Exxon also gave Mayflower Elementary $15,000 to pay for things like new computers, playground equipment, and they gave them money to spend on a big party after state exams. They also made a big impact within the community by ordering food from local restaurants. They would order 500 sandwiches from the local Subway and other shops or sandwich shops to help with the town revenue. With the pipeline turned off, it cost Exxon $3 million per week due to loss in oil tariffs. The pipeline was shut off for over a year and turned back on in July 2014. Overall, estimates say that Exxon spent nearly $70 million in Mayflower due to this spill. I want to give a quick review of the bitumen crude oil and its danger. This particular oil comes from Canada and is shipped through the United States. This pipeline in particular that burst can carry 90,000 barrels of oil per day from Illinois all the way to Texas. Bitumen crude oil alone is way too thick to flow through a pipe. So it is diluted down with hydrocarbons, and that is what makes crude oil so corrosive and toxic due to the impurities included to help it flow easier. These chemicals include aromatics or benzenes that we know are carcinogens and very volatile to be released in air particles. Heavy metals are also included, most commonly nickel and vanadium. These heavy metals are not corrosive to the pipeline itself, but if spilled out, they are very toxic to the environment. Bitumen will also include sulfur compounds, which are very corrosive in nature and break down the internal wall of the pipe. And they are 8 times higher in bitumen crude oil than any other oils. It is the microorganisms that consume cathodic hydrogen from steel that produce corrosive end products such as sulfide. It is the hydrogen sulfide and excess hydrogen that leads to damage or cracking in the steel. Another component in bitumen is organic chlorides. The total acid number, which the most common acid is naphthenic acid, are carboxylic acid compounds that corrode the distillation process and they can clog these pipelines. These total acid numbers persist in the environment in sands and sediment, and they can cause narcosis or cell death. Breathing in volatile compounds like the benzene emitted by gas from spilled oil is the major source of exposure that most of the residents from Mayflower were exposed to contaminants in this way because efforts were in place to keep people far away from directly touching the oil. It has been said when the smell in the atmosphere is obvious, then the health risks increase, and people who live in Mayflower nearly 7 miles away say that they could smell the oil outside their homes, and that the smell was so strong throughout the town that it lasted a few days. The oil had soaked lawns within the subdivision and ran into a stream that leads into Lake Conway. Mitigation teams worked for months to ensure all visible oil was eliminated, but let's be honest, it's almost near impossible to prevent contamination in waterways. These are the health effects that residents suffered during the incident, and we are currently still receiving complaints of such symptoms. They include headaches, nosebleeds, bowel issues, hemorrhoids, skin rashes, fatigue, nausea, respiratory problems, which we know that hydrogen sulfide included in bitumen can cause respiratory issues like coughing and pneumonia. People's hair was falling out, and there was even one case of a little girl who had a seizure. One man still says he is suffering from headaches so severe that they wake him up at night, nosebleeds, and even hemorrhoids. He also had a skin rash on his neck that appeared during that week and has only gotten worse in the 8 months after. It is very hard to find healthcare professionals close to Mayflower that know how to diagnose and treat chemical exposures. It is not something seen often in this area, and many doctors could not associate the symptoms with the spill. One small child had a seizure the day after the spill, and the ER only gave her a muscle relaxant. While many children have had increased allergies and respiratory issues since the spill. One mother saw an Exxon representative in the grocery store in Mayflower and told her of the coughing symptoms her daughters had developed. And the representative told her that they would just pass away, and that she never relayed any information about the possible exposures or any toxins or where or how to receive help. When it comes to mitigation techniques, many industries come together and dug up lawns to remove oil from the soil. The brush along the creeks were gathered in bags, and the U.S. Environmental Services had absorbent booms placed in Lake Conway to suck up any oil before going into the middle of the lake. The next week after the incident, Wildlife Response Services from Seabrook, Texas, came to help out the species that were affected. Overall, it was said that there were 23 ducks, a river rat, and 5 turtles that died. There are a few reports that say that there were a few more than this that had passed away due to the spill. ADEQ and Exxon collected water samples and found no oil in surface waters. The EPA and the United States Environmental Services was in charge of air monitoring and found there were no levels of danger. Also, since Exxon was not communicating with residents, community health activists took the responsibility upon themselves and they went door to door to warn residents within close proximity of potential exposure dangers. Because Mayflower is a rural town of the South, there were certain things that should have never occurred, or things that should have occurred. The residents of Northwoods said that they was never made aware of a pipeline running in their backyards, while Exxon says they are required to notify residents every 2 years if they are within 650 feet of a pipeline. Also, a report released after the incident found that Exxon knew of the problems with the pipeline that was built in the 40s, and they decided to gamble with time on when to repurpose it. One mistake made during the cleanup process was shortly after the spill, while oil was still running down the street, many community members of the small town of Mayflower were curious and standing outside watching this occur, and they was never told to back away or cover their nose due to potential risk of toxic chemicals in the air. Later, many people suffered from burning nasal passages, a cough, pneumonia, and nausea due to this. And there are still people suffering from these side effects because we're getting calls. Also, Exxon now admits that not evacuating the entire neighborhood was a big mistake. Basically, in order to cut costs, they only evacuated residents who had oil in their yards or in their homes. But it's now understood that everyone has been affected by it by being so close, because people are still having headaches and respiratory distress, especially children. Representatives did not even go door to door and explain the possible consequences of the contaminants that they were exposed to, and should have, because residents are not experts in crude oil. Lastly, the state and the Arkansas Department of Health has not collected any data on the illnesses people have experienced due to this, and they did a poor job informing people of the available options, like the poison control hotline that was set up. Many residents have said that they never knew about it, and so others had to take responsibility and go door to door. It was later realized that Exxon tried their hardest to cover up a lot of things so they didn't look so bad. After complaints from residents of respiratory issues, the Arkansas Department of Health monitored home air quality and said it was safe. But there are sources that has reported levels that were very high due to independent sources that went in and checked the levels themselves. ADH threshold is 50 parts per billion for benzene, while the EPA says that levels of 9 parts per billion or lower can cause long-term health effects or harm. One citizen group found total toxic hydrocarbons of 88,000 parts per billion in the ambient air. For water quality, Exxon and the EPA said there was no oil within Lake Conway, only trace amounts in a cove, very close to the open lake. While other independent studies of environmental control, which one is called OFLEX, found oil within the water column, and Game and Fish supported OFLEX because they have found dead fish and other wildlife only to be found in the main body of the lake. The drop in value, so the whole public health burden, how it affects not just one individual, but the entire community, and maybe even long term, is the drop in the value of these homes left residents without places to live. Many have had to stay in hotels for long periods of time, and Exxon in the end has just had to buy out their homes, because who wants to live in a house where there used to be a couple of inches of oil standing in it? To this day, there are still homes sitting empty in the subdivision. Many who have had negative health effects have not gotten the treatment they need because many doctors in this area are not used to diagnosing such chemical exposures. To many that sought treatment, they were told that it was not associated with the spill, but their symptoms only began after the incident. Without getting treated the way that they should, this could lead to worse effects down the road. A lot of the chemicals in bitumen oil bioaccumulate in fatty tissues and will cause negative effects later in life. Ultimately, it was said after a 2-week exposure in which you could visibly see oil, if a person develops cancer later in life, it will be really hard to know and make people believe that it was due to this spill. But in reality, this could be possible. So what can we do now here at ADEQ? Since the Arkansas Department of Health has not collected any data on the illnesses experienced after the spill, I think it would be beneficial to begin a study to find if there is any association. We should concentrate on the location, the timing, and the behavior of individuals we have gotten complaints from and who were in the area of this spill, especially the ones that stayed and were not evacuated within the subdivision. In the end, if we find any association, I believe it's very important that we ensure that residents are getting the care they need, set them up with physician and a team of healthcare professionals that can take care of their needs and so they can get better. And here are 4 references that I have found. So far, there will be more, but these are the 4 that I have to go on at the moment. Thank you for your time. These are my references that I have found. Thank you so much for your time.